In recent days, the US has moved sharply toward a new phase of pressure against Venezuela, one that may include ground-based operations. As tensions mount, the world watches. Will this be another chapter in the war on drugs or the opening salvo of a broader confrontation? The US President Donald J. Trump has publicly declared that the United States will very soon begin operations on land in Venezuela to stem alleged drug trafficking into the United States. Since early September 2025, the US military has carried out repeated strikes on vessels off the coast of Venezuela and elsewhere in the Caribbean, operations that Washington says targeted drug smuggling boats. At the same time, a dramatic legal and diplomatic escalation has accompanied the military moves. The US has designated the alleged trafficking network known as Cartel de los Soles, Cartel of the Suns, as a foreign terrorist organization implicating members of the Venezuelan government and security forces in narco-terrorism. The combined effect US military forces, including aircraft carrier strike groups, are now deployed in the Caribbean in what the administration calls a crackdown on narcotics. But many analysts now warn that the campaign may be shifting toward direct pressure on the Venezuelan state. Against this backdrop, tensions with Caracas, led by Nicolas Maduro, have grown increasingly fraught as the world braces for what could be a new chapter in Venezuela-US confrontation. It is essential to parse what is really going on, what's changed, and what might come next. During a call with US military service members around Thanksgiving 2025, President Trump delivered a clear message. After months of naval operations targeting drug trafficking by sea, ground action is now imminent. The president said, "You probably noticed that people aren't wanting to be delivering by sea anymore and will be starting to stop them by land also. The land is easier, but that's going to start very soon. We warn them, stop sending poison to our country." In his remarks, the president praised previous US strikes on suspected narcotics boats in the Caribbean, claiming they had disrupted roughly 85% of drug flows by sea. This declaration marks the clearest official signal yet that Washington may be preparing operations inside Venezuela or along its land routes. The United States isn't treating this solely as law enforcement. On 1 October 2025, the EU formally notified Congress that it was in a non-international armed conflict with unlawful combatants, referring to drug trafficking networks operating in the Caribbean. Under this classification, lethal force becomes legally permissible under the law of armed conflict, giving the administration latitude to conduct strikes even if civilians might be involved. This shift represents a major expansion of the 2025 anti-narcotics campaign under the Trump administration. What started as maritime interdiction has now evolved into a possible campaign against terrestrial infrastructure, including facilities allegedly used by drug networks and affiliates of the Venezuelan state. To support this strategy, the US has mounted its largest naval deployment in the Caribbean in decades. An aircraft carrier strike group, including USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced American carrier, along with destroyers, cruisers, a nuclear-powered submarine and other assets, has been dispatched to waters near Venezuela. US Marines have held live fire drills. Satellite imagery confirms that key naval assets are positioned within striking distance of Venezuelan coastal infrastructure. Meanwhile, under this broader campaign called Operation Southern Spear, the US authorized clandestine operations, including covert activities by intelligence agencies. In short, Washington appears to have positioned itself for more than just anti-narcotics strikes. The infrastructure is in place for potential strikes on land inside or just beyond Venezuelan territory should the administration decide to proceed. A cornerstone of this escalation was the US decision to label the Cartel de los Soles and, by extension, parts of the Venezuelan military and government as a foreign terrorist organization. This label gives the US government broader scope to target financial, logistical, and physical infrastructure tied to the group. The designation frames the conflict less as narcotics enforcement and more as counter-terrorism, a shift that carries far greater legal and operational latitude. It also signals that senior Venezuelan officials are not immune from targeting a dramatic intensification of pressure. The Trump administration frames the campaign in stark moral terms. Venezuelan drug traffickers are not just criminals, they are poisoners, sending lethal drugs into the US that kill thousands every year. Given the claim that maritime drug routes have largely been disrupted, the logic goes traffickers will shift to land routes and a ground-based crackdown is the easier way to stop them. Trump's messaging to both military personnel and the American public emphasizes urgency and moral clarity. This is not a geopolitical gamble, but a crusade against narcotics threatening U.S. communities. While stated as an anti-narcotics campaign, many analysts see the larger goal as increasing pressure on the regime led by Nicolas Maduro. The U.S. narrative links Maduro and his inner circle to drug trafficking, corruption, and terrorism, offering legal and moral justification under U.S. law for targeting regime infrastructure, potentially even outside drug-related activities. The proximity of U.S. naval assets to Venezuelan territory and the broader armed conflict designation effectively widen the scope beyond isolated interdiction operations. Some U.S. officials reportedly hope the pressure may lead to a regime change, though others warn of the high costs and unpredictability. The Venezuelan government, headed by President Nicolas Maduro, has repeatedly denied the U.S. accusations. Caracas rejects the allegations linking the state to drug trafficking or narco-terrorism. Venezuelan officials call the U.S. narrative a pretext for intervention. Nevertheless, Venezuela is reacting with increased military vigilance. Authorities have reportedly mobilized troops, fortified coastal and border zones, and tightened internal security. Reports suggest growing surveillance in parts of northeastern Venezuela, especially in states like Sucre, where earlier maritime strikes reportedly originated. Amid mounting U.S. pressure, Maduro has publicly called for defiance, warning citizens and state security forces that Venezuela stands ready to resist any aggression. What began as a fight against drug trafficking may now evolve into a broader confrontation, with U.S. warships so close and an armed conflict declared. Any miscalculation or even perceived provocation could trigger escalations leading to military clashes. The U.S. has not publicly ruled out all options, which could theoretically include precision strikes on land-based infrastructure in Venezuela. Such a move would carry major humanitarian, political, and regional security risks, particularly if civilian casualties occur or if Venezuela mobilizes its military or militia forces in response. Inside Venezuela, the pressure is already being felt. Local reports from areas affected by earlier maritime strikes describe increased checkpoints, searches of homes, restricted movement, and growing fear among inhabitants. Even if strikes are limited to drug network infrastructure, the ripple effects collapsed informal trade, shuttered local economies. Fears of repression could deepen social distress in a country already burdened by hyperinflation and economic collapse. Internationally, U.S. moves are under scrutiny. Some of Washington's traditional partners in Latin America, already uneasy about heavy-handed intervention, may balk at a campaign that risks destabilizing the region. Others may view U.S. aggression as a pretext for regime change, complicating diplomatic relations. Moreover, third countries and international bodies may raise concerns over sovereignty, international law, and the legality of extraterritorial strikes. Meanwhile, nations aligned with Venezuela or simply wary of U.S. military ambition may respond with rhetorical or diplomatic opposition, potentially energizing regional flashpoints. Whether the U.S. proceeds with ground strikes the next few weeks may reveal whether Trump's land action threat is carried out, toned down, or delayed. Official statements, movement of troops, or new covert operations could offer early signals. Venezuelan response, internal security clampdown, or mobilization. If Caracas responds with military mobilization or wide-scale surveillance and repression, the crisis could deepen rapidly. Regional diplomatic reactions, how Latin American neighbors and countries with strategic interests in the region react, will matter. Increased U.S. pressure could provoke diplomatic backlash, especially among nations that oppose foreign intervention. Humanitarian and displacement risks. If operations result in turmoil or mass displacement, the human cost could be severe for Venezuelan civilians already suffering from economic hardship. Legal and international law challenges. Designating cartels as terrorists and treating drug networks as combatants is controversial. Human rights groups, regional bodies, or international courts may raise concerns about civilian casualties, extrajudicial strikes, and violation of sovereignty. On the surface, the Trump administration offers a familiar narrative: drugs, cartels, American lives lost, and a moral mission to intercept narcotics before they reach US shores. But beneath the surface lies a broader strategic gamble, using the war on drugs as legal and rhetorical cover for targeting a regime widely seen in Washington as corrupt, authoritarian, and deserving of removal. What could follow may not just be interdiction, but a confrontation with major implications for Venezuela's sovereignty, regional stability, foreign policy, and the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. As history has often shown, once the rubble settles after a strike, the consequences, intended or not, may turn out to be far-reaching and unpredictable. You probably noticed that people aren't wanting to be delivering by sea anymore and will be starting to stop them by land also. President Trump, the land is easier, but that's going to start very soon. President Trump, these remarks are not mere rhetoric. They signal a turning point. Whether the turn leads to disruption of drug trafficking or escalation into a full-blown geopolitical crisis remains to be seen.